So often, success in anything comes down to just not making mistakes. Now, it's inevitable that we're all going to make mistakes at some point, and we're not going to maximize some of the things that we can look to maximize. But what I hate to see is when people are making mistakes that are easy to avoid. So in today's video, I'm going to talk about the 5 most avoidable retirement mistakes that I see to ensure that you can avoid these with your own situation. Hey everybody, I'm James Canal with Root Financial Partners, and I'm here to teach you what you need to know to create a secure retirement. Now, there's all kinds of mistakes that people make, and these mistakes are typically really big things that they're thinking about. Of, oh my gosh, I should have had this tax strategy, or oh my gosh, I should have had this really elaborate investment strategy, or oh my gosh, I should have, and the list is endless. Well, that's fine, and there are some things that you can look there, but let's talk about the low-hanging fruit. Let's talk about those mistakes that are easier to avoid. If you just had the right information, just by not doing something, you're going to come out a lot further ahead. So yes, you could talk about the really in-depth stuff. We'll save that for another video. Let's talk about the most avoidable mistakes that people make so that you can apply this to your situation. So let's start with this. The number one most avoidable mistake is spending the wrong amount. Now you hear that, you say, oh yeah, that's obvious. You don't want to overspend in retirement, because if you overspend in retirement, chances are good you run out of money too early. Yes, that's one way that you can spend the wrong amount. But the other way is I see too many people spending too little. So we're all very keenly aware of spending too much, and that's a big concern we all have. We're just hardwired to not want to run out of money for obvious reasons. So oftentimes people are so cautious, so conservative in their spending, they're spending less than they're actually able to. And in doing so, what they're doing is they're sacrificing things that are important to them. They're not taking that trip that would be really meaningful. They're not able to go visit family like they would like to. They're not giving the amount they would like to give to the causes that they care about. So as we're looking at spending, it's not just a dollars decision. Really, we should be spending to fulfill what's most important to us. And if we're spending too much, that's a problem. Because that problem says you're gonna have a really fun time today, but you're not gonna be able to sustain that. And at some point you will run out of money. But too often I see the reverse also being true, of people sacrificing things that would be important and meaningful to them because they don't understand how much they can spend, and so therefore they spend too little. This is why with retirement planning, a lot of the videos that we'll go through here, it talks about how can you maximize the amount you can pull out of your portfolio. How do you apply a social security strategy that maximizes the income you can create over the rest of your lifetime? How can you implement a tax strategy that helps to maximize the after-tax income that you have? Because as you look at these things, it's really all about the core point, which is how can we enhance our lifestyle? How can we live a life of purpose and intention and contentment? And it comes down to making sure we're leveraging the assets and the income and the resources we have to be able to do what's most important to us. So the biggest thing I wish people could see is, yes, there's a risk to spending too much money, but there's also a risk, which comes in the form of regret at a later time, of not spending enough and foregoing some of the things that are really important to you. The second thing I see that's a very avoidable mistake for people is retiring at the wrong time. Now, I don't mean retiring in 2008, and of course, how were you supposed to know the mortgage was going to drop by 50%? I don't mean retiring at the beginning of 2000, where the market was about to go 3 terrible years in a row. That's unavoidable. We cannot predict ahead of time what the market's going to be doing, what inflation is going to be doing. Those are all external things outside of our control. What I'm talking about is not retiring at the right time based upon what we can control. And just like the spending conversation we just talked about, most of us are keenly aware of the risks of retiring too early. It leads to not enough portfolio. It leads to a lower Social Security benefit. It leads to higher medical expenses before Medicare. It leads to more years of needing your portfolio to support you. So yes, there is a risk there, and that's a risk if people simply knew how much they needed to have in their portfolio, what needed to happen so they can maintain their income throughout retirement. They could, and I don't say easily, lightly, but in most cases, people would gladly exchange a couple more years of work in exchange for not running out of money too early. So that's one risk. The other risk, similar to spending, is people retiring too late. And this is more of the avoidable piece. This is largely driven by fear. So often, the people who have gotten to where they are, and the people I speak with who have accumulated a significant amount and have done well, there's almost been this scarcity mindset that's driving that, of this fear in many ways, of I need to save, I need to invest, I need to defer. And it's been healthy to an extent. It's healthy to the extent that it's allowed them to get to where they need to go, but that fear doesn't just turn off. They can't just flip a switch and all of a sudden go from a saving mindset to a spending mindset. And I've talked to people who have more money that they could not spend over 2 or 3 lifetimes, but they're afraid to retire because of that mindset and because they're fearful. And if that's too driven by fear, the fear of not having enough, the fear of running out of money, the fear of not knowing what to do, goes back to point number 1. What are you sacrificing? What are you giving up? What are you not able to do because of those extra years of work that you're putting in that you don't necessarily need to? Now, I'll always say this, if you love work and you want to keep going, wonderful. Just think of that as a hobby. But if you hate work and if you want to be out, but you're too fearful to make that jump, what's it costing you to continue growing your portfolio, but losing out on some of the life along the way? The third most avoidable retirement mistake people make is this, is they focus on just one type of investment risk. So if I were to ask you, what's the biggest investment risk that you're going to face when you retire? I feel like most people, you're going to say, well, James, it's the stock market. The stock market and the ups and downs could derail my ability to retire. Or maybe you've watched a bunch of these videos and you've done your homework and you say, no, James, it's sequence of return risk. That's the biggest risk in retirement. And maybe that's the case. Here's actually the biggest risk in retirement. It's not understanding risk fully. So every investment that you make, every decision that you make brings a certain degree of risk to it. So number 1, yes, there's certainly risk in the stock market. It doesn't take a lot to see how a downturn of 40 or 50% the year you retire could be really devastating to your portfolio and to your retirement. But if that's the only risk you focus on, you run the risk of being too conservative. And your portfolio is so conservative that you totally protect against that risk and no downturn is going to impact your ability to retire today. But you're not going to be able to maintain your purchasing power over time. Your portfolio is not going to be growing enough to keep up with the rising cost of living, and it's going to feel very comfortable and nice and secure today, but 10 years, 15 years, 20 years from today, it's going to start feeling really tight. And things that you were able to do at one point in retirement, you're no longer able to do anymore. So that's why I want you to understand the second risk, and probably the more silent risk, but the more, or at least equally deadly risk, is the risk of inflation. And what I mean by that is as everything gets more and more and more expensive, if we're allocated too conservatively, and if we're invested too much in secure, stable investments that bring peace of mind today, there's a great risk over time if we're too allocated that way. So understanding both of these risks and understanding how can I invest my portfolio in a way that mitigates the risk of the stock market, it mitigates the risk of inflation, how can we mitigate the risk of our own personal decisions? So often those 2008 type events, yes, they can be devastating, but more often than not, it wasn't the event that was devastating, it was our reaction to the event that was devastating. What changes were we making along the way? What were we doing to be reactive that ended up costing us and our ability to not recover from that downturn? That's another risk, is just the risk of our actions through that time. So if we are looking at this appropriately, we need to understand that yes, the stock market is one risk in retirement. But number 2, so is inflation. Meaning if you have $100,000 of living expenses at age 60, by the time that you're 90 years old, you would need almost $250,000 to maintain the purchasing power that you have with $100,000 at age 60. So keep all those risks in mind as you're looking at retirement, because if you only understand one aspect of risk, you're probably going to allocate your portfolio incorrectly and maybe subjecting yourself to even bigger risks along the way. The fourth biggest mistake in retirement is providing too much support for adult children. Now, I see this so often of people who are preparing to retire today. Oftentimes, they're caring or at least somewhat responsible for an aging parent, and they may also be caring for an adult child. And what I mean by that is maybe not caring for an adult child in the sense that they're still at home, but it's maybe an adult child that's still in college or just graduated college. And the temptation as a parent is to care for and nurture and provide for. Well, as you're looking at your retirement, I see too often people they're supporting their parents, which is necessary many times. They're also supporting their children. And we just have to look at this and prioritize. Sure, if you want to help your children buy that home, if you want to help your children financially, if you want to help your children do all these different things, I'm not here to say that's good or bad. I'm here to help you understand what's the trade-off of that. What's the impact of doing that upon your retirement? And sometimes parents, to them, it's almost like family support. There's no price tag you can put on that, which I agree with. But if you're supporting your children, your adult children, and it's costing you from being able to put money into your 401k, or it's costing you from being able to pay down your mortgage, or it's preventing you from being able to do what you need to do to be able to retire, you at least want to understand that. We want to understand the trade-offs and the implications of anything that we're doing, and I see it so difficult for parents to stop doing some of that. They want to support, they want to provide, but in sending kids through college and then graduate school, or through helping kids with down payment, or through helping kids financially, it's a wonderful thing. But let's make sure we understand what implications that has for your ability to provide for your retirement. Because my guess is the last thing you want to do is be able to provide for your kids and support your kids, but then in doing so, you're underprepared for your own retirement, which means a few years from now, you have to go back to your kids and ask for them to support you. So more often than not, how can we make sure that you are on track? How can we make sure that you are doing what you need to do so that number one, you're never a burden upon your children, and then number two, if there's still funds and resources and money left over, let's talk about the most strategic way to support children at that point. So that can be a very touchy subject, but it's just a mistake that I see people make because it's a very emotion-driven thing of wanting to care and support, but we have to understand what will that care and support look like when it comes to your ability to meet your needs. And then the fifth most avoidable mistake is just not having a strategy. And here's why. You may be awesome at putting your money in your 401k and maxing out these accounts and paying down the mortgage and budgeting and doing all these different things. But if you don't have a plan, if you don't have a strategy, no amount of saving and investing and portfolio balance is really going to bring you peace of mind. No amount of having another 100,000 or 500,000 or a million or more in your portfolio is ever going to bring you that peace of mind if you don't have a plan and a strategy for how this is going to support you in retirement. So having a plan, having a strategy is going to help you understand not just what you have, but what can that do for you? How can what you have, how can that success turn into the peace of mind of understanding this is the lifestyle that I can now maintain? Here's the things that I'll be able to do. Here's the different kind of guardrails I need to stay within as I'm spending money in retirement to make sure that I'm not overspending on the one hand, but on the other hand, make sure I'm not underspending and forgoing some of the things that are important to me. So as you're looking at this, make sure that you have a strategy, whether it's with your investments or the pension options that you have or your social security strategy. Make sure that you have a plan for how much longer you're working, how much you need to earn, how much expenses you're going to have in retirement, how that might change over time. In doing so, it's going to bring a tremendous amount of peace of mind, and it's also going to allow you to maximize those investments, maximize your tax savings, maximize the income you can ultimately create from everything that you've worked so long and so hard to be able to create. Thank you for watching. I'm James Canal with Root Financial Partners, and if you found value in this video, please be sure to share it with someone else who you think would also benefit. Also, be sure to like this video and subscribe if you haven't already done so for more content just like this. And if you want more resources about how you can create your secure retirement, be sure to check out our podcast called Ready for Retirement. And finally, if you're interested to see how our services can help you create your secure retirement, be sure to find us at rootfinancialpartners.com.